Hi everybody, welcome back to the DesmoWorks channel, and apologies for the delay in getting this video out, but lead time on parts has been a bit of a nightmare. So I finally got the half shell bearings for the crankshaft, and I've already done the crankshaft shell bearing replacement. So what I'll do is I'll put a link up above to, I think it'll come up that side, to where I've did it with the other engines that I've built. So I felt wanted to get ahead so I could just shorten the amount of time I needed to be filming to get this video out to you. So I'm hoping to get the video out today, because I only got the bearings on Friday. So I did those on Friday night and then I was out yesterday, unfortunately. So all the bearings are here now. So we've got main bearings, the main gearbox bearings, we've got the support bearings, the timing lay shaft bearings, I've got the cylinder studs to put back in. Then there's the seals for the swing arm spindle and the bearings for the support for the swing arm spindle. So swing arm bearings go in here, the main gearbox bearings go here and here. Obviously I'll flip it over and show you again. Main bearings go in there. Then we have a support bearing support bearing that goes in there, and the support bearing that goes in here, and then the timing bearing goes there and there, and I'll flip it over again in a second and show you that. So aim of today is to get all of the bearings in. We will then set up the preload for the crank correctly, and we will also set up the float for the gearbox shafts. I'm going to be doing it in the quick way. That is to say, I'm not going to be measuring the depth of the cases to work out the calculation for the shims. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just use the float method. So I'm going to put it in, measure out how much movement we've got in the end of each shaft, and then work out the shim clearances based on that. Again, I'll put a link up into that side of the screen for how to calculate your clearances for the crankshaft and the gearbox if you want to do it the factory manual way, but I'll also show you the quick way that we do it as builders as well. Okay, so there's a lot to get on with today. So one of the things I need to do first is I need to just get all of the bearings out of their packets, put them in the freezer so that we can just shrink them down to make them easier to fit, and we'll be heating the cases slightly when we go to put the bearings in. So because the bearings are in interference feet, heating the cases up enables that to expand ever so marginally, and the bearings likewise being cold will shrink ever so slightly, so it just reduces that interference slightly and makes it slightly easier to put the bearings together. I will probably use a combination of the hydraulic press to put them in and then just bearing drifts. It depends on how easy they go in when they're heated, when the cases are heated and the bearings are cold. Alright, let's get into this then. Okay, so just laid out what's got to go. So this is the left hand side of the engine case as you'd be sitting on the bike. So we've got one main, which is a 7207 by, then we've got the timing roller bearing, which is a 6003 by C3 bearing. We have the gearbox support shaft bearing, which is a 2NU03EC. And that's the spacer washer, the original one, because I only just slightly nicked it. That goes in there. We then have the main gearbox output bearing, which is a 6305 C3. Then we've got the two bearings that will be the swing arm roller bearings, which are HK 2016 bearings, and then the two seals that go in to support that as well. So I'm just going to go stick this set of bearings into the freezer, let them cool back for 10 minutes or so, and then we shall start popping these in. Okay, we're going to do timing support roller bearing first, followed by the gearbox intermediary shaft support. So I put a little bit of heat in. What I'm going to do is just add a bit more heat now. Now just need to stick the circlip in for the timing bearing. Okay, those two bearings are now in. What I'm going to do now is going to fit this gearbox bearing, which again we should be able to tap in. So what I'm going to do, just preheat the case slightly, then I'll go grab the bearing out of the freezer, heat it again, and then we'll drop it in. Okay, that's the gearbox bearing in. The intermediate support shaft bearing and the timing bearing. Let's get the main bearing in. What I'm going to do is use the hydraulic press to push this one in, because I'd like to know it's fully seated. Okay, slight camera failure in the midst of putting that bearing in. So that's the main bearing in, pushed right down in using the hydraulic press. So what I've got to do is I've got to lock this gearbox bearing in. So there is a little bracket that I'll just use to do that in a second. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to get these swing arm bearings in. So should be noted there's a snap ring in here to stop them pushing in too far. So I've left that in, I didn't take that out at all. So you may not have that snap ring in there, so you might need to install that. And there's two seals. There's a seal that goes in first, then a seal that goes in after the two bearings. So let me go grab the seals and bearings and we'll start putting those together. Right, just check that's in properly. You can just see it seated there. Next, the two bearings. Right, what I'm going to do is change to actually pushing these in with a hydraulic press, because I'm having to hit them with a lot of force, and I think I'm just worried the repeated impact could damage the actual face of the bearing and start to pinch the rollers. So with using a hydraulic press I can get a consistent pressure on there and not put as much force onto it. So let's just do that. I've got a slightly bigger drift just to give it a start under pressure, then I'll switch back to the right one. I can't set the camera up decently to get an angle, so I'm just going to do this off camera. So that's it, half pushed through. Just going to release the pressure and then change over the drift. So I'm going to use this drift here just to get it in the final way. So that's the drift's just turned around, so I can finish pushing it all the way in. Let's just do that now. Okay, so that first bearing's pushed right in. Second one to go in, which I'm just going to use the hydraulic press. As the bearings are so small that even with preheating the cases, freezing these back, the moment I'm touching them on, I'm just getting such resistance to pushing them in. It's just easier to use the hydraulic press. So I'll try and get a decent camera angle so I can show you it. There we go, both bearings in. All I've got to do now is just tap in the last of the seals. So let's grab that. This is going to be slightly more awkward to put in because the sharp edge has got to go in first. Okay, one case completely completed. That's terrible grammar. One case completed. I've just got to put the securing bracket on there, but what I'm going to do is just get the other case all sorted out, and then we'll do the last finishing touches before I actually start putting the cases together to measure clearances. Okay, so next set of cases. I'm not going to film me putting all the bearings in because you've just seen me to do that, but what I'm going to do is just talk through the bearings that are in here again. So we've got an RNU 202 ECP, which is for the timing lay shaft. We've got a 7307x2 ETN, which is the main bearing. A 6305 C3, which is the gearbox output bearing to the clutch. And then an NU 203 ECP for the gearbox support shaft for the drive shaft that goes out, so the opposite end to the gearbox output. And then again 2 HK 2016 bearings and 2 of the seals. Alright, I will be listing all the bearings in the description, so if you want to refer back to them when you're ordering your own bearings, if you're not going to go direct to Ducati, it gives you the option to source aftermarket bearings. Right, I'm just going to pop these together, and when I come back, all the bearings will be in and we'll be ready to start moving to putting everything together for a first measure of end float and preload. Okay, see you in a bit. Sorry, I didn't realise the camera hadn't started then. So all bearings are back in. I've just put these 2 retaining bolts and large washers for the gearbox bearing. They go in at 10 Newton meters with a bit of blue lock-in thread compound. Just about to put the circlip in for the roller bearing over here on the intermediate timing shaft. Doesn't want to play ball. There we go, that's nicely in. Okay, we are all set now to put the cases together with gearbox, crankshaft, all in, and we can just work out what our float is. So we can preload this correctly and get the end float correct on both the output shaft and the clutch shaft, or the intermediate shaft. Let's do that. Okay, so we're going to put the cases together to measure the clearances. What I've done is I've taken off the existing shims for the crank, which were 2.35s. I've put 1.9s in. That should give me some clearance to assess the preload. And then I've taken off a shim at each end of the gearbox. So I've taken a shim off down on the clutch side, a shim off on the gearbox output side, and a shim off on the drum. I've put a little bit of oil on here because this was sticking, and if you remember I sanded that down because that used to stick. Let's put the cases together and measure floats, because it should be floats, everything should be moving. Okay. Okay, cases are bolted up. Let me get the dial gauge set up and we should be good to go. Okay, so we're set up as we have been with all the other engines I've done before. I've got the alternator tool from a 3-phase engine just bolted down. I've got my magnetic base with a dial gauge on. We just need to zero that. Now this has got 3.8mm worth of total shimming in place at the moment, so all we're going to do now is we're going to work out how much movement we've got in it, therefore how much extra shim we'll need to add to that. So let's quickly take a measurement on that one. So we've got 0.68 of movement. So we've got 0.68 in there and we need to add 0.3 of preload, so we need to add 0.98 worth of extra shim material. Okay, let's get the other readings done. So we're at 0. All we got to do, just lift these up. Ooh, just lift it up slowly, I suppose. So 0. It's coming around to 0.88. Yeah, 0.88 worth of float there. Okay, so again, set up to go. just get round to the other side of the engine and we'll push that up just to check that, if I can find it. Where's the, there we go. So we got about 0.55. Oh, just make sure that's seated right down. So now push it up again. 0.58. Okay. Right, so we're now set up for the gearbox side. What I've done, for the clutch side. What I've now done is I've put the clutch nut on because it gives me something decent to lever against rather than trying to pull that shaft. So it's at 0 at the moment. And if you pull it up, so we've got 1.36 movement. Okay. Remember to take it off so you can get the gearbox back out. Right, I'm just going to flip this back over the way I put it together and take everything apart and check what shims we've got and shim the engine. Okay, the test shimming that I put on the crank, that comes to 3.83. We had 0.68 of float and we want to add 0.3 of preload, so we need to add 0.98 to that, which 3.83 plus 0.98 would be 4.81. Okay, the existing shim stack was 4.55, so we need to basically have more shimming than we previously had. Right, and we want 0.1 float on the gearbox, the shift drum and the clutch output. So let's just check what we had with the original shims. So this was the gearbox out, which is 0.8, so that will give us our clearance, so we can put that back as is, or as was. Then the drum clearance, 0.4, so again that will give us our clearance. And then 1.2, so that'll be at the upper end because 0.15 is the service limit, but that will be the gearbox output as well, to the clutch side, so let's just put that in as well. Okay, let's get the cases back on and we will re-measure to check that all of our clearances are good. Cool, that's a bit. So that's free to turn by hand, but is binding tighter than I would prefer. I'm used to doing race engines and not going to the 0.3 tightness of preload, so I'm going to back that off by 0.1 of a mil to 0.2 because it's, whilst it's okay, it's got a bit of resistance in it that I'm not comfortable with. So let's just check this gearbox output. Let's get that zeroed. And then we need to find something to leverage that with. Ooh. So that has got sorry, I was trying to work out why the engine was moving so much. It wasn't put fully on the wood block, so Just put that round to 0. So we're looking for 5/100ths. Yeah. No. So that's at the tight end of its tolerance as well, but is good. If we can stop the cases jumping, we've got enough clearance there. About 0.06. Let's check the other side. And 0.1 on the clutch side. So I don't know if you can see that, but that's reading 0.31. So that's outside spec by 0.005. So I just need to find another shim when I'm rebuilding. When I'm rebuilding this, I'll dig out another shim for the selector drum because it's service limit. But the challenge that I have with that is there's not a great selection of shims to go in there. So let's pull it apart. We'll take 0.1 of the shim off of the crank. I'll see what I can do for the selector drum, and then we should be ready to put this back together. Okay, shim changes have been made. So I've taken 0.05mm out of each of the crank ones because I just want to loosen the crank ever so slightly. There was no thicker ones for the selector drum, so I'm going to have to go with a slightly out of service limit selector drum. No problems with the gearboxes. The intermediate shaft is now in, ready for when we drop the engine in. And remember that on the later cases there's a little seal here. I've just held that in with grease. Bearings have been all lubed up on this side. What I'm going to do is just chuck a little bit of oil into these bearings, then we'll free bond the cases, get them together, job finished for today. Okay, so just oil at bearings and then I'll start doing the free bonding. Okay, free bond all around the engine. A little bit messier than normal because my pack is getting quite close to its end and it's quite hard to keep control on it. So not my cleanest, but it will seal. Let's drop the cases on. Okay, job done. Not as stiff on the crank, which is quite nice. Thought it wasn't spinning properly then, but then I realised the timing shaft wasn't pushed all the way through then. I had a little bit of a panic then. Right, I just took the time to wipe off the free bond while it was still wet rather than waiting for it to dry and then risk damaging the powder coating anyway. But I mean, that looks really nice. So we have set the crankshaft preload, so I've reduced it to 0.2 just because I wasn't comfortable with how tight it was. It's still tight, but it's freer to turn. All the float for the gearbox shafts has been done and the drum is at service limit, but I didn't have any shims that were slightly bigger to take account for that, so we're stuck with that as it is. Okay, so I'm going to knock that on the head for today, and when we pick up with it next time I will hopefully finish building the bottom end. So I will get all of the filters, strainers, oil pumps, gears in, do all of the alternator side and get the start motor and everything on. Cool. So that's a wrap there for me. Hope you enjoyed that video. It's one of our 2 hot days of the summer in the UK, so it's a bit unbearable in here at the moment. So we've got the bottom end together. We're starting to make progress in that pile of bits coming back to looking like a motorbike again. I've got some other bits coming back from the powder coater, hopefully on Monday, and that means I'll be in a position to fully finish the engine. So the next video we will finish getting the bottom end together, and then I'll talk through what the next steps will be for rebuilding the heads. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, chuck us a like. Any questions or comments, feel free to put them down below. And if you're not a subscriber to the channel already, I would welcome you as a subscriber. So hit that button, hit the notification bell, plenty more content to come, and I'll see you on the next video. Cheers, bye.